went to Al Hol to report. I went first in September just to get a sense of the situation and also to interview a mother, a Chechen ISIS mother there. I went back in October because I wanted to see how drastically the situation had changed as a result of the Turkish incursions. It's basically a city. This camp is 70,000 people, so it's just tense as far as the eye can see. It's stunning. In September, the journey was easy because it was one highway. Since the Turkish incursions have cut the roads, everything is more difficult to get to. Things take twice, three, four times as long to get to, but it's still possible. And the roads that you can take there are safe. So it's just an inconvenience, really. From Kamishli, it took us about 2 hours to get to Alpha, maybe a bit more. Especially after on my second visit, which was pretty recent, because Turkey bombed the main water plant for Hasaka, which is where Al Hol camp and Raj camp both are, um, meaning that water has to be trucked in, sometimes from a distance of 80, 100 kilometers away, and it's made sanitation a nightmare. And also because of the Turkish incursions cutting the M4 highway in several spots, a lot of the food supply lines are cut and dwindling. The foreign kids and the foreign women in general, they're in their own section and they're a lot more private. Most of the foreign women who are willing to talk are Russian, Uzbek. You don't. Most of the European women really don't want to talk, and they kind of shoo their children inside the tents when any journalists come. It's a more subdued atmosphere, but they're also still angry. After the Turkish incursions, supply lines were cut. It made it harder for medical professionals to get to the camp, and that's like one of the main complaints that we heard is that these women, many of whom were injured when ISIS was defeated in the course of the battle, are not getting any medical treatment because the medical professionals cannot get to the camp or can't get into the camp. We interviewed Kamal Okef, who is an official there in September, and he said, and he's been saying for over a year, we want all of their countries to take them back. The SDF, the Autonomous Authority in northeastern Syria, they're not the ones preventing this. It's the failure of the countries to come and claim their citizens. A YPJ commander said to me that we've been asking their countries to take them back for so long in calmer times, and they didn't, and they wouldn't. And now imagine what happens if they all escape. Because when Anisa camp was bombed and many of the ISIS families there escaped, many were not recaptured, and so they're either back with ISIS sleeper cells, or they're somewhere in Turkey, or you don't know. If these people escape, for the most part, the only place that they can stay safely escaped is in Turkey, because ISIS doesn't have territory in Syria. They don't have, they're sleeper cells, but they don't have a Raqqa anymore that you can go to and be safe. So, but if they're living the sort of ISIS sleeper life in Turkey, of course, it will have a hugely negative impact on the children and the future. Yeah. I met someone actually who was possibly British, though she wouldn't identify herself as such. Where are you from?
From here. Yeah, I belong now, innit? Unless my country's taking me back, I belong here. So tell me if my country's taking me back, then I'll talk.
Okay.
I don't know where I'm from. I'm from here now.
And then she began kind of rattling off a list of her own complaints, mostly related to medical care, things that they're not allowed to do, the fact that they have to pay for their own tents. And when I asked if she was from the UK, she wouldn't tell me. She said, I'm from here now. Unless my country's going to take me back, then I'll talk. But yeah, she wouldn't identify where she was from, and that seems to be the case. And if you ask the YPJ guarding the foreign women, they wouldn't probably be able to tell you off the top of your head where the British woman is or where the Dutch woman is, or I think that they've just maybe grown tired of all the media coverage and keep to themselves. She had children, wouldn't say how many. Almost all of the foreigners said that they want to go to Turkey because they don't believe that they'll be prosecuted in Turkey. And many of them don't believe that they've done anything wrong, even if they went and joined ISIS of their own volition. They don't believe that that was wrong. They don't believe that they'll be prosecuted in Turkey, and they think that the conditions will be infinitely better there. So that's what we heard a lot. One Russian woman even said, "Do you know a smuggler? Like, do you know a good way? I don't have anything to go back to. I know I don't want to stay in Syria. I wouldn't want to go to Idlib, but I don't have anything in my country and my husband's dead. So, I mean, I think Turkey's the best option." And I think that might have also been a cultural comfort with Turkey, which is Islamic and quite tolerant in terms of Salafi jihadism. So I think that's mostly what it is. I didn't talk to anyone who said that they wanted to stay in Syria, and I especially didn't talk to anyone who said that they wanted to stay in Al Hol. So I think that if given the chance, every UK citizen would get on a van and go to the border. I don't think that they've been part of the fighting themselves, and I think that in ISIS that was exceedingly rare and mostly for propaganda purposes. But they were a part of it in that they married fighters. Some of them married several fighters, as you know, their fighter men would die. But for the most part, none that I met were what I would call repentant. I mean, a lot of them regretted the way that ISIS turned out and thinks that, you know, that the caliphate went in the wrong direction, but they were not sorry for what they did, and they didn't think that they made a wrong decision. It's unclear how long we have because it's unclear to everyone what's going to happen on the ground. We see, I mean, yesterday Turkey shelled Tel Rifat and killed, I think it was 8 children. So it's unclear. Things seem to be moving in a calmer direction overall, with more and more Russian control on the ground. But it's also unclear who's going to take control of the prisoners. There were rumors when the Turkish incursion started that it might be Turkey taking control of them, which would be very, very disturbing. But as Russia and the Syrian government take more control of territory, there's no telling what happens to these women. I mean, or if they're taken by the Syrian government and held in detention there and then inaccessible forever. Whatever state laws, like the UK can strip someone of their citizenship and essentially leave them stateless. They're not Northeast Syria's problem. They can't be forever. And these children can be redeemed. Children can be de-radicalized. And it's been done successfully many times, but they're not going to be as long as they're in a refugee camp around the same toxic influences. Some of these families have just recently been released, actually. They're from Deir ez-Zor. They're released back to Deir ez-Zor. Not all of them are ISIS affiliated. It's just a question of ISIS controlling the territory that they were living in when ISIS was defeated by the SDF. So they were all kind of taken to this camp. But then many of them are Syrian and Iraqi ISIS families. I think that more and more of these Iraqi and Syrian families will be released as they've sort of vetted and done their investigations and realized that some of the families there are not affiliated with ISIS and that they're not a risk to the autonomous administration or anyone else. So they're released, and they just released a number of them back to Deir ez-Zor, and they'll continue to release them. For the ones who are deemed to be a security risk, I'm really not sure. There's no plan. We know that when they are the ones that have been handed back to Iraq, to the central government in Iraq, have almost all been sentenced to death. I think that assuming that they would have enough unity to get back together and to do anything together is sort of ridiculous, even within the camps, because there have been, you know, rumors that they're creating a caliphate within the camps, and that's not really happening either. Even those who still have the extremist ideology, and that's many of them, are not looking to reform a group. They're just looking to survive. And if they're sent back to their countries and their countries can handle, you know, prosecution, de-radicalization,